Greetings and welcome back to Room 303. We are now going to deal with the famous passage from Gibran's The Prophet on work. This is lecture number 8 of our proposed 30 lectures on this classic work of poetry and philosophy. This is one of the longer titles in poems in the Prophet, and maybe one of the most important. There are certainly a large number of folks who will report that when they read this chapter, when they read this poem, it just kind of blew their mind in a lot of ways. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side to find our playlist. I'm hopeful that you have gone through our introductory work and then you've worked through all the previous poems, because these poems can be read in isolation, and they usually often are, unfortunately. But it's so much better to read them as they compound upon each other. We just finished with eating and drinking, and now, of course, once you eat and drink and you can sustain yourself, the question is, well, what do you do with yourself? And the answer, of course, is work. Now, like the other texts here, the other poems, we're looking at something very normal from a spiritual perspective. Like Thoreau and his romanticism, we're going to have a certain view of work and labor. And, of course, the question will be, can you make your life's calling your work? That will be the goal. I want to point out all the musical references in this passage, and I also want to point out that this is a radical response to the Genesis 3 account of the Garden of Eden story, and more particularly that 15 through 19 passage, what is sometimes referred to as the curses section. After the forbidden fruit has been eaten, there's certain kinds of curses that are given. Specifically, it can be interpreted as labor or work. We'll talk about it. And then as well, the response, I think, radical response to the Bhagavad Gita as well, especially passage 2, you have the right to work, but for the work's sake only. You have no right to the fruits of your labor. So as we get into this, we'll see that Gibran is really a powerful, integral thinker. And I'm hopeful I can make that argument here. Then a plowman said, now notice the plowman, one who tills the ground, right? Speak to us of work. In other words, he knows that he works. This question is, does he work well? And he answered saying, you work that you may keep pace with the earth and the soil and the soul of the earth. It's all about rhythms. For to be idle is to become a stranger unto the seasons and to step out of life's procession that marches in majesty and proud submission towards the infinite. Think about our study of Love Song of Jalfred Prufrock, T.S. Eliot's classic poem. We've given a full lecture at learnstrong.net. Think about that. Prufrock's primary problem is that he's what? An observer of life, not a participant. Do I dare disturb the universe? You'll remember that he asks. I love this idea that if you're idle, then you're a stranger to the proud submission towards the infinite. And then the next passage, when you work, you are a flute. Notice all the musical referencing here. Through whose heart the whispering of the hours turns to music. Which of you would be a reed, dumb and silent, when all else sings together in unison? I mean, obviously it's brilliant, brilliant poetry. All of nature is symphonic. You must be a part of that symphony, ergo, work. And then he'll begin with this, you've been told, or you have heard. And so this is fun. Notice his use of the word always or often. Always you've been told that work is a curse and labor a misfortune. And of course the Genesis 3 account, Adam is told that because of his eating of the forbidden fruit, that he will have to toil and it will be hard. And some have read this as work is kind of, unfortunately, very difficult and demanding, a curse even. But notice the formation, you've heard but. But I say to you that when you work, you fulfill a part of earth's furthest dream assigned to you when that dream was born. And in keeping yourself with labor, you are in truth loving life. And to love life through labor is to be intimate with life's inmost secret. It's, I think, beautiful to talk about labor as being loving life. And he even uses quasi-sexual or intimate language here. You make love to life when you work and do good labor. But if you, in your pain, call birth an affliction and the support of the flesh a curse, again we're back to Genesis 3:16, written upon your brow, then I answer that not but the sweat of your brow shall wash away that which is written. And again, of course, the sweat of the brow is a reference to Genesis 3:19. In other words, Work is redemptive. It's restorative. You have been told, notice we're back to that construction. Of course, the question is by whom, right? You've been told also that life is darkness, and in your weariness you echo what was said by the weary. And I say that life is indeed darkness, save when there is urge. And all urge is blind, save when there is knowledge. And all knowledge is vain, save when there is work. And all work is empty, save when there is love. And when you work with love, you bind yourself to yourself and to one another and to God. This is, of course, the brilliant insight that he makes, that labor is only pure if it is somehow married to passion, to love. And what is it to work with love? Now, this is powerful stuff. How to work. Think about the work that you do, whether as students or the adults in your life that do work. Think about this one. And what is it to work with love? It is to weave. Think about the power of the imagery of the Odyssey and weaving. We talked about it at LearnStrong.net when we did all of our lectures on the Odyssey. It is to weave the cloth with threads drawn from your heart, even as if your beloved were to wear that cloth. In other words, when you sew something, sew it as if you were making it for the one person in your life you love the most. Or it's to sow seeds with tenderness. It is to build a house with affection, even as if your beloved were to dwell in that house. It's to sow seeds with tenderness and reap the harvest with joy, even as if your beloved were to eat the fruit. It's to charge all things you fashion with a breath of your own spirit, and to know that all the blessed dead are standing about you and watching. I remember listening to the great Toni Morrison in an interview talk about her father, who took such great pride in the welding that he was doing that he would sign, even though he would sign the weld, even though it was going to be covered. And his argument to her was, I take pride in the work that I do. I've always found that to be an inspiration as I think about the work that we all must do. You do it because it's the most important thing in your life. And the other recognition, your great-great-great-great-grandma is watching. As we commented in our lectures on T.S. Eliot's Hollow Man, and that notion that those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom remember us, if at all, not as lost violent souls, but only as the hollow man, the stuffed man. That idea, your great-great-great-grandma is watching what you do. And when you work, you should work with that recognition. It's a brilliant insight. Often, back to this idea of often have I heard you say, as if speaking in sleep, he who works in marble and finds the shape of his own soul in the stone is nobler than he who plows the soil. Now we're going to talk about the hierarchy of work. Is it true that some work is more important than other work? And he who seizes the rainbow to lay it on a cloth in the likeness of man is more than he who makes the sandals for our feet. In other words, artists, their work is more important because what they do is more lofty, if you will. But, notice this again, but I say, not in sleep, but in the over-wakefulness of noontide, that the wind speaks not more sweetly to the giant oaks than to the least of all the blades of grass. And of course, as we've said, his love of Walt Whitman, I think, comes through here. I think there's a lot of Whitman. The celebration, as we said in our talks with Walt, the idea that all of work is sacred because it's all valuable. It doesn't matter whether your work is highly celebrated or not. The work that you do is precious if you understand it as so. And he alone is great, who turns the voice of the wind into a song made sweeter by his own loving. I mean, think about, again, Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, passage 48, and there's no trade or employment, but the young man following may become a hero. I think this is the argument that's being made. And then for some, they consider the next line the best line in all of the prophet. Work is love made visible. Some of you will take that line, you'll write it down on a piece of paper, and you'll leave it somewhere to be reminded. What a brilliant line. Work is love made visible. And if you cannot work with love, but only with distaste, it's better that you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms of those who work with joy. Wow. For if you bake bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but half man's hunger. And if you grudge the crushing of the grapes, your grudge distills a poison in the wine. And if you sing, though as angels, and remind us of 1 Corinthians 13, right? And love not the singing, you muffle man's ears to the voices of the day and the voices of the night. Compelling the idea if you can't work with absolute joy, there's something profoundly toxic about the work that you're doing, both to yourself and to others. Well, how are we going to begin to leave a passage like this at 2a? Well, I think it's right there. Work is love made visible. No single line is, I think, more compelling than that from the prophet. What a brilliant line. When you labor, when you work, whatever that work is, ask yourself, am I manifesting love? For myself, for the work, and obviously for the recipients, for others. At 2b, note the construction of you have heard, but I say. It very much reminds us of, at 3a, of course, the Matthew 5 passage of Christ's Sermon on the Mount. But I'd like to now think about how Gibran will take the Bhagavad Gita, especially that passage 2, and step beyond it. As beautiful as that passage is, as Arjuna and Krishna are there on the battlefield, and Krishna is giving these words of encouragement. You have the right to work, but for the work's sake only. You have no right to the fruits of your labor. Desire for the fruits must never be your motive in working. And then the last part of that passage, never give way to laziness either. What's fascinating is that in that entire passage in Gita 2, the word love is never mentioned as it relates to work. Here, Gibran will say, and I think brilliantly, the reason why you don't worry about the outcome of the work or the rewards of the work is you're doing it out of love, so it doesn't matter whether it's appreciated or not. Then finally in 3b, wow, that is a compelling image of work. How about it? Do you think, practice this kind of view of work, of art, of training? Yeah, I mean, you can think about this in any way you want. Is it possible to work without worrying about the rewards, without doing it saying, I'm doing this for some kind of ulterior motive, I'm doing this simply because of love? And I often think about, for example, we think of mommies and daddies who take care of their children, and they don't do it for any ulterior reason or motive. They do it because why? Because when you were a child, they loved you, and they took care of you, and they provided for you, assuming that they did. And if they did not, then at least have some gratitude for the fact that here now you are, and you can work, and you can choose that work to be a product of love. Work is love made visible. From here, we then, and it's beautiful, the symphony of this text, we'll then go to questions and comments on joy and sorrow in Lecture 9. I hope you're enjoying reading Gibran's Prophet. Thank you.